it's another super late behind the scenes video on all the videos I put out in the last month and a half. The last one I did of these was like day 2 of being at Nate's house, I think. So everything since then, we're going to talk about why it happened and like what went into it. So I'm just going to go through everything that's in these weekly content roundups that I post because that should be everything, and let's go through it. So, Digi and Guy's Workout Achievement Hunting. This one came about simply because Nate has that fit achievement chart on his wall. It's just a list of achievements from the fit board of 4chan, which there's a bunch of stuff like this out and about on 4chan, and yeah, it's just like a bunch of different workout stuff, and I was going through it, like looking at it and observing all the ones he didn't have checked off, and I was like, a lot of them are ones that you needed a partner for. So I said, oh, you know, we could do these while I'm here and we could make a whole video about it, because we wanted to do some kind of like goofy live action workout video. I think someone had actually asked us like on Twitter or something to do a workout video, so we thought it would be really funny. And yeah, like I just kind of went down the list and we'd read one that like we thought we could do with 2 people, come up with a funny way of doing it, and then record it, and we filmed that all in about an hour and a half, and it was great. And there's the part where we each got a text from our girlfriend where like we told them to like say the thing, and then they did. Although in his case, I think he couldn't get a hold of an actual girl, so we just had a friend do it, but we changed their names to like whatever dumb shit for that joke. That was the only like outside involvement, I think, but yeah. And then I edited it, I put in all the music and everything, most of which I had come up with like while we were recording it, like I knew what was going to be in there. So yeah, very quick and dirty and fun video that I really, really like. So then we continued the old ass anime cast. I've talked about that enough already. Clarifications on my problems with mysteries. This happened just because like every time I say I like a show that has a mystery element, people were like, I thought you didn't like mysteries. And I was like, I felt like I'd already made a video clarifying this, but I guess I hadn't, so I figured I'd just put it in one place so that that meme would die. I'm sure I've talked about why Eromanga Sensei happened before, and Insufferable Social Media Argument, the podcast. The Dark Souls 3 DLC Let's Plays that me and Victor did, yeah, that like we finished that off in the last month. Oh, I guess I must have talked about that too previously. So yeah, a lot of this is stuff that's just part of series. Manga Mondays, interview with Best Guy Ever, which I put together because you know, I was doing an interview series on the procrastinators, and like I was doing 3-hour interviews with each of them. The first one was with Ben Saint, and that one was just kind of random, but it went so well that I wanted to do everybody else, and finally got to Best Guy Ever. Little fun backstory of that: we tried to record it before. We did like an hour and a half, I think, but it was while he was drunk because he'd been drinking box wine, and he was just like so shit-faced that he was saying all kinds of stuff that he didn't want to say, and so he demanded that I give it to him, and he listened to it and was like, yeah, no, this is not getting posted. So yeah, that's it was a redo, which is part of why it took so long. Then we've got Rixty Minutes, the new podcast me and Nate are going to do on Rick and Morty, which we did a pilot episode because we were covering the pilot episode of season 3. Well, not pilot, but like they released episode 1 way the fuck early as an April Fool's joke. But yeah, we covered season 3 episode 1, and this just kind of came about because the Eromanga Sensei Every Week podcast went extremely well. Like, me and Nate loved doing it every week. The response we got to it was really good. Everyone seemed to enjoy it, so I was like, we should obviously keep doing these kinds of episodic podcasts, because Nate's extremely reliable. He's always going to be around at the end of a week, and he can always find a lot of stuff to say about something. Like, he's the only person I know who's as long-winded as I am. The only person who can just go and go and go and never run out of steam. So, like, the two of us make a pretty natural podcast duo for this kind of thing, for, like, episodic blogging. There's no one else I could do that with. You know, there's other people I could do weekly shows with, but not like this. So, I was like, we should do one on a show we really love. Let's pick my favorite show, one of his favorite shows, Rick and Morty. And, because season 3 is coming up. So, yeah, that went pretty well. People seem to like it, so look forward to the rest of that. We've got some more Manga Mondays. The Kingdom Hearts Let's Play. Tons of Let's Plays I did with Best Guy Ever while I was at his house, just simply because I was there, and we were trying to come up with content to make together, but like there's only so much you can do because he gets off work at 6 p.m., takes him like usually an hour to get home, if not more. Sometimes he stayed late, and he'd get home and it's just like, well, we didn't have any like ideas beforehand. Like we took care of the things that we had planned to do pretty quickly, and then it was just a matter of like, all right, what do we do to fill time? Let's just play video games, and we'll record it. So we did a bunch of let's plays that are fairly entertaining. They're all on the Bestie Boy channel. You must know this because they're in the weekly roundups. All right, Writing the Zeitgeist. That's my new series, and I've wanted to use this title for a podcast for like over a year. Like I came up with the idea of making a show called Writing the Zeitgeist because it's just such a cool name, and I love the word zeitgeist. But at the time, I was like, well, I'm not gonna always be keeping up with like what's in the zeitgeist. Like how do I follow it? How do I know what is the current zeitgeist? And I was worried that I wouldn't have enough ideas for it if I ever finally did it. But the lo-fi hip-hop thing, like, just fascinated me so much that it was like all these particular elements that came together to create this moment in time where for some reason this one style of music is really popular in this one weird like release method of 24-hour live streams on YouTube. And I was like, this is a perfect zeitgeist moment that needs to be broken down before it disappears. And I caught it, and people seem to really enjoy that. It got a pretty good viewership for a fucking no video podcast. So yeah, I'm pretty happy with that, and I've got ideas for other ones that I'm gonna cover, but that one was put together in a hotel room. Like that's part of why. I think that's part of what like inspired me to finally jump on and do it, is that it was something I could do in that situation. Like I really couldn't make a full video, so I was like, well, I've got this idea for Writing the Zeitgeist lo-fi hip hop. This has to get done now, and it was like, it was perfect. It came out at a perfect time because if I'd sat on that idea any longer, it wouldn't have been relevant because those are already like starting to die off. Like people don't care as much about lo-fi hip hop anymore. So I really caught it at the zeitgeist moment before it completely faded back into obscurity. All right, what else do we got here? Diluting genres and communities. I don't remember what inspired this video. It was lo-fi hip hop, of course, because yeah, it was a response to Writing the Zeitgeist because of the fact that lo-fi hip-hop fans on the Reddit board were complaining that like I didn't really talk about like lo-fi hip-hop the way they understand it. But I was like, that's not what the zeitgeist is. That it's this other thing, this thing that's in the popular consciousness that's understood another way, and it's just gotten away from you. So, Good Art is the first to go. I explained what inspired that in the video, just the fact that I was traveling and anything that wasn't, like, amazing was not worth my time, So, like, lots of stuff that I would normally keep up with in a very passive way. In fact, the stuff I probably watched the most of, because I can watch it passively, was the stuff I was ignoring because I didn't have time for it. American East Coast state-by-state driving review, obvious what made that happen, and how much of what I brought around the country was useful. That one was almost like a joke because of the fact that I did so little vlogging on the road. Because I built up to the fact that I was taking this road trip for like a while, and I think that obviously put it in people's heads that there was going to be like a bunch of content about the road trip. But like, I don't really do that. I don't really vlog road, like anything other than ideas, because what would I vlog? Like just footage of me driving or going places? Like, I'm not Casey Neistat. I can't make that interesting, I've tried and I've failed in the past. So the idea of like vlogging about the trip didn't really make sense, except in like the meta elements of like what's brought on the trip, like what is interesting about like the system by which I took the trip. So, stuff like how the driving was and what I brought with me. So I just thought it would be really fucking funny to come home from the trip having made like an hour-long, video about everything I was bringing with me, and then the next video about the trip is just about whether or not any of that stuff was useful. Yeah, it was a good time. Alright. So we got the Gay and Dead album. there's a huge vlog explaining the entire process of how this album was made, everything that went into it. So you can watch that video if you want to hear the whole backstory of Gay and Dead, how it was made. Yeah, it's pretty in depth, but yeah, it's just a fucking full length album. The first album I've made that like not only is like actually the length of a real album, but in my opinion is good enough to be thought of as a real album. Like, you know, I've made some music that I am pretty happy with in the past, but this is the first one that, like, to me is a fucking good album that you would listen to because you like it. So yeah, quite excited about it. Wrapped up Old Ass Anime Cast. Then we started the most interesting thing about videos. So what inspired this is basically just that I needed to keep Devu employed. Because Devu, in the time since he moved back home, I have been on all this, like, moving around the country and doing all this shit kick, and I haven't really been making time for main channel videos. I haven't really been doing a lot of scripted content. You know, I've been doing tons of unscripted shit, and I've kind of fallen out with, like, a lot of the concept of, like, doing just edited anime videos, like, edited analysis and reviews and stuff, but, like, I still think I'm gonna do more of that, and I'd still like to have Devu available as an editor. You know, I'm not, like, ready to fire him or anything, and I feel like he really needs this work. So I was like, okay, how do I keep him employed when I'm not doing full-length videos right now? Well, I've been talking to him for a while about the idea that, like, now that we're not paying on a per video basis, I can pay him different rates for different sizes of video. Because kind of a big problem we were having for a while was I couldn't give him, like, a 5-minute video because I wouldn't be willing to patron market. And therefore, because, like, I didn't think it was worth the amount of money that I'd make on Patreon. And so I wouldn't be able to, you know, pay him that. So, like, I had to make videos that were of at least a certain length, but then if it's too long, then it's, you know, he deserves to be paid more than the amount I'm making on Patreon. We have to split it into parts, and, like, just, that was all a pain in the ass. So I just said, like, well, now that we're, you know, not doing it that way, I can just have you make a giant video that's worth $1,000, or I can have you make a tiny video that's worth $250. So the most interesting thing about is the latter. Tiny videos that I can pay him just, like, you know, like a flat rate of $250, and he makes it in, like, a day, and they come out and they keep my channel not dead, and they allow me to explore just, like, random ideas about shows that I don't want to make a full video about, because I'm sick of this mentality of, like, oh, I want to talk about this show, I have an interesting thought about it, but the video has to be 10 minutes long so I can mark it on Patreon, you know, like, that's gone now, so I can just make a video just exploring the one idea, even if it seems like, you know, it's not like a full, oh, I got the whole video experience. It's just like, oh, okay, that was an interesting point, you know. So the first one was on Rurouni Kenshin, and it was inspired because when I was at Endless Jess's house, I was sleeping on his couch the first couple nights, and I had just started putting on random anime on Netflix. Like, one night I just put on Inuyasha and went to bed to episode 1, and then I did the same with Rurouni Kenshin, and, like, listening to Rurouni Kenshin episode 1, I realized, like, I was just, like, reminded how good Kenshin's dialogue is, that he's, like, this really interesting character, and, just got the gears turning, and, like, about how I think a lot about Kenshin Himura, and, like, about that idea of, like, just helping the people who are right in front of you as opposed to trying to, like, change the world, and how I've adopted that mindset. And I always, like, when I talk about that, I attribute it to Kenshin. So I was like, well, clearly this is a really interesting thing. I should make a video about this, even though, like, I don't want to have to rewatch all of Kenshin or try to, like, you know, put together a fucking analysis of the quality of the show. Just let's talk about the most interesting thing about Rurouni Kenshin, and then hence the series. So yeah, that's what inspired it. Then we got Earning the Ability to Be Just Good, which was, yeah, a response vlog to a response vlog to my vlog. I explained all that in there. And the Fart Knockers Anthem mixtape EP, which was basically just me and Blind Skywatcher, when we were making Gay and Dead, we would typically start off the day making a song, then get super high, and stay high all night, and we'd record weird podcasts and other shit while we were high. And so we recorded the Fart Knocker Anthems mixtape EP, which was me and him and his friend Sean Spoon just freestyling over hip-hop beats. So we'd take like a Kanye West beat and loop it for 20 minutes, and then each of us would just go up to the mic and rap. And it's a fascinating experience. I can't say it's like a great listening experience, and only like a couple of songs are even remotely good, but the whole thing is really fascinating. Alright, so then moving into the most recent giant post. So we got the most interesting thing about Gakko Gurashi and Shimoneta. Gakko Gurashi, that one, I just talked about this in the podcast on the $15 tier, but I had that idea 2 years ago. Like, right when I finished Gakko Gurashi, I wanted to make a video about it, but the only like thing I really wanted to talk about was this aspect of it, that it undercuts cutesy moe scenes because it's so fucking dark. And I like just never had enough other ideas about the show to make a whole video about it, and so I didn't. And then when I had this idea for you know, just making 2.5-minute videos that just make the most interesting point, this was like the first thing that came to mind. Like, looking through my mallet, I was like, oh, I gotta do Gakko Gurashi. And then Shimoneta, like, this one point about Shimoneta I've like kind of talked about a little bit in other places. Like, I've brought up how interesting it is that the censorship you know, almost plays into the themes of the show. And I always thought that would, like, if I made a whole video about Shimoneta, I'd really just talk about that. And, you know, I've made other videos about Shimoneta. I did a cool character designs on it, but, like, I just wanted this one point to get out there. So this was a good vehicle for that. So this is also a good way for me to, like, revisit old shows that I have one thing to say about, like, and just bring that up. And then after this last collection post, there was also a video on Studio Sanzigen, and that one was inspired by me and May watching ID Zero a couple weeks ago when we did the Finish or Fail video. And yeah, I was just really struck by how much I liked the animation. Like, we started up the show and it was full CG, and we were like, oh god, you know, what are we getting into? But then we ended up really liking it, and it was only afterwards that I looked up and found out it was Studio Sanzigen, who had also done Bubuki Baranki, which I had also felt the same way about, and I went, this studio's figured it out, let's make a video about that. And it was also a good way to break open the most interesting thing about series, so that it's not just about, like, a TV show and, you know, the most interesting thing about a show. It can also be about a studio, it could be about anything. So, you know, I'm glad that that happened early. Next up, Digibro Rocks Anime Expo. Simply put, I had an Anime Expo panel. It had no planning went into it. I just went up there and did it, and it came out pretty well, and people seemed to enjoy it. The PCP versus Mumkey's Book was a PCP podcast that we did recently about Mumkey's book, simply because a few of us had read it, and, like, I guess Nate read it and just really wanted to talk about it, so we did a podcast about it, and Mumkey was very happy with the fact that it existed. The Gay and Dead behind the scenes. Obviously, I've done behind the scenes for all my album releases. The Spice of Quiet podcast guests. This one had to have been somewhat transparent, but, like, when me and May did the Finish or Fail video, which was her first appearance on my channel, like, lots of comments were about the fact that she didn't say much, and, like, you know, why have her in there if she didn't say much? And I was like, well, even if she doesn't say much, she brings something to the table. So I, you know, and I've had this comment many times about many other guests over the years, so I found a way to explain it without ever mentioning that it was obviously about this video I just had with my girlfriend in it, because I didn't want, like, I thought this was an interesting point, but I didn't want people to treat it as though I was just saying this to defend my girlfriend and, like, bad comments about her or something. So I, you know, found a way to say it differently, and I think it came out really well. I love that video because I get so animated and passionate in it with my weird metaphor. Breaking down my favorite rap verse, TV on 10. This is another thing where, like, I've just wanted to do this for a long time. I've wanted to get into analyzing lyrics for quite some time, because that's kind of how I got into analysis, like, as a kid, was through trying to learn the meanings of lyrics. And I did one on the song Plenty of Girls in the Sea by MGMT, but the video came out super awkward, and that kind of, like, soured me towards doing it again for a long time. But with TV on 10, like, I've been giving this analysis to people, just, like, when I play the song for them, and I, like, explain how cool it is afterwards, and I was like, I should just do this in a video. And again, it came out really well, so that's definitely inspired me that maybe I can do more of that. Finishers Fail Spring 2017 anime. This was kind of like, basically this came about because May was at my house. This was before we were planning to move at the end of the week, but she had a week at my place. She was just on vacation, and we were hanging out and doing stuff together, and like, there's only so much you can do in Virginia Beach, so at some point I was like, hey, let's fucking watch anime. And then I said, what if we did like a Finish or Fail and just watch some current stuff? So I put together the thing, and we did it, and it was a fun time, and we realized, as we already had, basically, that we have exactly the same taste in anime. So we pretty much are always gonna, like, I was thinking the series would end up with, like, one of us wants to continue and the other doesn't, and that might bring a different dynamic, but no, we feel the exact same way about everything we watch. 5 more great bands no one talks about. This is another thing where I'd planned to do this for a long time. Kind of like every time I listened to Ocelot or Sunshine Faces, I would have this idea that, oh, I can make another one of those 5 great bands videos and talk about these bands that literally no one's heard of. And then, like, that kept popping up in my mind when those songs would come on in my car. So finally I was like, okay, I'm going to do that, and we'll just come up with 3 more: Toe Hider, Endless Jess, and Cool Swim and Pretty Maxim. I wouldn't have even really put in there, except that I needed a 5th one that like literally no one had heard of, and that came to mind first. Then there was the Breaking the Habit shitpost. This came because me and May were in the car and Breaking the Habit was playing, and I said, isn't a nun's outfit called a habit? And she was like, yeah. And I was like, I know what to do with this knowledge. Digimonkey and Friends Let's Play Extravaganza. I explained how that happened at the beginning of the video. Then there was a Digibros and Girls, the Slime Rancher video, which is probably one of the worst Digibros episodes because it's 3 hours long and we're all just like tired and out of it. It was pretty much just recorded so that we could do a Digibros before I left again. But Victor insisted on playing Slime Rancher, which is like a totally mind-numbing game that I had nothing to say about, so it was weird. And then there was also the Elements of Brony Icebreaker came out this week on the channel of Neil X, which the Elements of Brony, I could go into a whole thing about what that is, but like basically it was a podcast series or videocast series that this guy Neil X was putting together, where he was essentially trying to capture everything about the Brony fandom in one series of videos. It was supposed to be like a documentary, but in podcast form, and just cover it on an ever-increasing scale. So, like, the first podcasts are more about, like, just the show itself, and then, like, the fandom, and then the social issues, and then eventually we broaden out to, like, really big philosophical stuff. But unfortunately, we never finished this thing, and the early videos, like, people weren't as interested in, which I thought the later ones were the best ones, and Neil agreed, but, like, he was putting so much effort into editing this, because they're, like, an hour and a half long, and he was going all out with the editing, because this was in 2012, or 2013, where, like, long videos that have no fucking content weren't a thing yet. Like, it used to be you had to heavily edit something, and then even then the fact that it's so long would prohibit anybody from watching it, which is why these weren't successful. When just a few years later, they could have been not edited at all and would have had the same view counts, because that's just how YouTube is now. Very unfortunate, but like, you know, he didn't want to like abandon the series, so he kept chipping away at it for years, but eventually I was like, dude, I'm not even in the pony fandom anymore, so like, you know, it's weird to do this. But there had been an icebreaker where we all got into a call for like an hour and a half just to sort of like, you know, conversate and figure out how this would go once we recorded it. And he recorded that and planned to release it at some point, and now it's out. So this 4-year-old podcast with me and a bunch of bronies is now online, and I haven't watched it yet, but I'm highly interested. Yeah, so then we've got in the last week, you know, since posting my last roundup video, we've had Digi and May's Ota Cave Expedition, which this is kind of a no-brainer to me because as I've said before in like Insomnia Analysis, I've always wanted a series where I just pull something off the shelf and talk about it, and I've never been able to justify it because like the idea of doing that, like you'd have to open with a clip of me pulling something off the shelf, and then I'd have to like explain it and then review it. And I've always felt like I could just cut off the first part of that. It doesn't need to be there. You know, like, I can just review the damn thing. Or, like, I just could never figure out a system where this would be satisfying for the viewer. Like, it would be satisfying for me because I get to pull things off of my shelf and review them, and I've always wanted to do that, but it's not satisfying for the viewer. So, like, the only way I could figure out that it made sense was it's not me. What if May, who is, you know, new to my collection, who is a huge anime fan but hasn't seen, like, tons and tons of shit the way I have, and she was, like, telling me, like, she was so fascinated with my collection, and she was saying, like, when we were packing everything to move, she was, like, realizing that by moving in with me, she was inheriting this giant collection of stuff she could consume, and was getting really excited about it. So I was like, what if we had a series where you just go through and find something interesting, we both consume it, and then we talk about it, and that way I can explain it to her, and then we watch it, and then we share our thoughts, and I am really satisfied with the way the formula works in these videos. Obviously, it'll take some time before May is going to be completely comfortable on camera and able to, like, say what's on her mind easily, but, you know, I kind of just view her as an extension of myself in these videos. Like, she just kind of fills in the gaps of what I didn't say, or, like, reminds me of what I should say, so, like, I don't know. I see it as, like, really just one mind communicating through two mouths, almost, since we literally have the same opinions on everything we watch. But, yeah, it's a good time, and I look forward to making more of that. We even got, because my incredibly terrible opening song, which wasn't supposed to be that bad, but, like, I just rushed it because I wanted the video to come out. Good friend Fern Gooley redid it and sent me a version that I'll be using in the future, so that's cool. Then there was this Fate Apocrypha podcast. So, yeah, Eromanga Sensei every week ended, and me and Nate were looking for the next thing to cover because Eromanga Sensei was a huge success. So we were gonna just cover, like, whatever's the most popular show of the season. So initially we were gonna do Kakegurui, but after watching the first episode, both of us were like, this show is so obvious, like, what is, whether you like it or not, what is the quality of it is completely evident in the show itself. We don't need to talk about this, and neither of us liked it. I thought the aesthetic was disgusting. So I was like, fuck it, we'll move on to the number 2, which is Fate Apocrypha. It's another A1 show. It's bound to be terrible. We can rag on Fate. It'll be a fun time. But the show is, like, agonizing to watch. And then we made the podcast, and I thought it went pretty well, but, like, all of the comments are just Fate fans being butthurt, and, like, I kind of don't even want to deal with it. So we're probably just going to, and we also realized it's 25 episodes afterwards, so we're probably going to abandon Fate Apocrypha and just do a different show instead. But yeah, that's how that came about. We were trying to continue every week, but it ended up being kind of a clusterfuck, and I'm just going to go through and, like, find a show that will work well, as opposed to just trying to watch the most popular show. But I also then made this new vlog, Difficulty Begets Hot-Blooded Fandom, which is actually an old-ass blog post, because I've been going through my blog trying to find, like, interesting things I wrote years ago that I think could be readapted into video form now that I have an audience, and one of them was Difficulty Begets Hot-Blooded Fandoms, where I basically make the exact same point about, like, Dark Souls and Mega Man at the time, in Toho, I think, and then, like, I just took that, and it, like, I had found that in my, you know, blog the other day, and I wrote it down as something to talk about, and then when I got this backlash from the Fate fans, it really reminded me of that, because I was like, oh, this is one of those hot-blooded fandoms, like, people care very deeply about Fate because it's so hard to get into, and then me dovetailing that turned into me just ripping on Fate completely unintentionally. I had no intentions going into the videos that I was just gonna, like, rag on Fate and its fans, but I was so mad about the comments on the other video that I just kind of let loose, and then the video just devolves into weird meta at the end, and it's kind of beautiful. It has, like, a whole emotional arc, and I really like it. So yeah, that's what's happened in the last month and a half. Hope you enjoyed, hope you liked all those videos, and you'll continue to watch me in the coming month.